Fair, which won the Eudora Welty Prize from the Mississippi University for Women in 2015. Dr. Pfeffer earned a master's degree in English and a PhD in urban history at the University of New Orleans. After 2 long careers in women's fashion illustration and as a manufacturer's representative, she is presently a visiting scholar at Nicholls State University in Thibodaux, Louisiana. Join me in welcoming Dr. Miki Pfeffer.
Thank you to all the people who made this event possible, and especially to Brittany Caldwell, who invited me to be part of this. And thank you for being here, early birds. I'm so glad you came. I'm going to tell you a story mainly about women, but not exclusively so, at the World's Fair in New Orleans in 1884, 85, and what it meant for them to come to taste freedom there. Women from all over the country came together for the first time into the South. They displayed the work of their hands and minds. They came to exhibit, to represent their state, to compare their work with others, and as they organized and collaborated, they also talked with women from outside their regions and put aside some stereotypes. Being together validated needs and desires that they might not have expressed otherwise. For 6 months, newspapers and magazines covered the fair's every angle, as indicated by this 2-page spread from the Illustrated Weekly, The Judge. The whole world pays respect to New Orleans, Miss New Orleans. Cities we usually represent as female figures, also think Lady Justice and Statue of Liberty. But since we're in Natchez today, I want to pay respect to your dear Mississippi's presence there, and especially to her women. But first, what was this fair, this extravaganza? The full title was the World's Industrial and Cotton Centennial Exposition, ostensibly to celebrate 100 years since the first bale of cotton was shipped, but more so to entice investors to repair a faltering economy and bring industrialization southward. Promoters of a New South touted this event as a miniature world of all arts, sciences, and industries. In other words, claiming to show a full snapshot of the current human condition and a plan for a better future. So it was marketed as a progressive event, and Black citizens and women took that to heart. The first modern American fair had been in Philadelphia in 1876, and as industry and science advanced, more regional festivals and fairs popped up. A Mississippi planter, Colonel Franklin C. Moorhead, visited many of these regional fairs, and as Commissioner General and roving ambassador for the Cotton Centennial, and he found Julia Ward Howe of Battle Hymn of the Republic fame at a Boston mechanics fair, and he, as head of the women's department there, and he thought that was a really good idea, so he brought that idea to the New Orleans Fair. To orient you, the fair was located on 249 acres, what is now Audubon Park in New Orleans. I presume you know where that is. Formerly, it had been sugar plantations, so it was an undeveloped land. There were just rows of moss-lined oaks, which caught a lot of people's attention, but the rest of the land was undeveloped, so it was perfect for setting up a whole fair. It was 5 miles from the French Quarter. I have the French Quarter outlined in blue there. The main building held products from pin cushions and thread to locomotives, sawmills, and working factories. Most exhibits decked out in fantastic display. Gustavus Torgerson designed the main building. It just so happened he was a Mississippi architect of Swedish descent, living in either Laurel or Meridian. The ground plan shows the main building, 33 acres, and the government and state outlined in red there. 33 acres, it was the largest building built at the time. And the government and state's building, outlined in red, was a third of the size of the main buildings, and there were smaller buildings scattered on the grounds. On the left was Mississippi River. It ran to St. Charles Avenue. Tulane and Loyola were not built yet. And you see neighborhood blocks laid out, but the neighborhood was not developed yet. The state of Mississippi was represented in most buildings. For example, manufactured goods were in the main building. In the horticultural hall, Mississippi showed apples, pears, quinces, oranges, pomegranates, peaches, strawberries. And this is a shot of the ground floor of the government and state's building, where we will focus today. I wish I had had the contract for the bunting and flags on that building. The federal agencies were in the center of the building: the Interior, Smithsonian, Agriculture, Treasury, Navy, War, Justice, Land and Patent Office, Fish Commissions, railroads, and the State Department and a working post office were on the grounds. And I call your attention to the gallery that can be seen up there. Can you see all right? It's kind of light. The nearby Mississippi section with cotton as king. It showed from plant to fabric, cotton from plant to fabric, although farmers were already beginning to diversify. The South was anxious to bring mills to the cotton rather than cotton to northern mills. And actually, there were already 9 mills in Mississippi, including in Natchez, the Rosalie Cotton Mill, and the Natchez Cotton Mill, with 250 operatives. I can imagine that women were among those operatives. And Natchez was already a thriving railway hub. Also shown in the Mississippi section was silk culture, from cocoons to fabric, geological collection, tobacco, grains, clays and clay products, including bricks, tiles, and pottery. Also dried leaves of tea and a 12-foot diameter slice of poplar with items made from it. And I think you still tout your lumber industry, because here's what was in my goodie bag yesterday: a slice of wood with Natchez on it. Mississippi Day was March 17, 1885, and newspapers reported 4,000 Mississippians came. Newspapers carried the speeches verbatim, and those of Commissioner General Moorhead, who had initiated the fair, were among them. The ground plan here shows Mississippi's 11,700 square feet outlined. That's about the 1.5 times the size of the Natchez Civic Center. Promoters designated spaces and left the rest to the departments. So participants had agency, the freedom to shape how they wanted to be seen, especially the black citizens and the women. took advantage of that. Here was an opportunity to direct their own destiny at a world event that drew daily attention across the nation. All three departments divided their spaces by states. Ohio, in the colored department, shows women's work predominating, and Texas, in the women's department, predominantly white women's department, was the only state that had more space than Mississippi. And then there was an education department on two sides of the government and states building galleries. All these three departments were on the gallery of the government and states. The education department showed students' papers and student work and drawings, and there was a small zoology department. If you're looking for a research topic, no one has done anything with the education department at this fair. I think that would be fascinating to study. 2,000 teachers, black, white, men, women, were expected over Christmas, who would examine the students' work and lodge in rooms that cost 50 cents to $1, or with board $1.50 to $2. And some stayed at hotels. Illustrated weeklies showed the mix of people moving easily through the grounds. There was no restricted movement of any citizens there. However, the freedom of movement enjoyed by black citizens at the time was temporary. By 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, with Plessy versus Ferguson separate but equal, it was gone. But in 1884, there was still what I call an interlude of optimism. Promoters named Blanche Kelso Bruce of Mississippi to head the entire colored department. Though born enslaved, he was the first black man to complete a full term in the Senate from 1875 to 1881. I know that Hiram Revels, is that how it's pronounced, or Revels, served a year in the Senate, but Bruce was the first man who served the full term. And at the time of the Cotton Centennial, he was the Register of the Treasury. So his signature is on the paper money. If you can find money from 1881 to 1885, you'll see his signature there, B.K. Bruce. For the next 4 years, he was the Treasury, Register of the Treasury. Not until 1967, with Senator Edward Brooke of Massachusetts, did a black man serve a full term in the Senate, so 80 years. Bruce's assistant commissioner, J.J. Spellman, arranged thousands of items. One contemporary commissioner called it a magnificent showing of splendid progress made in all branches of industry, art, and science. Excuse me. Again, there were lots of women's work and a strong emphasis on education, with special events that included demonstrations of kindergartens, which were just coming into use, and abundant schoolwork that drew excursions of black teachers to the city. Over in the white women's department, thank you. I have some water going there. Thank you. I feel like State Commissioner Honorary State Commissioner S.A. Jonas of Aberdeen appointed Lady Commissioners Mrs. Margaret C. Leonard of Port Gibson, but Miss Maggie Kidd of Aberdeen seems to have been the workhorse of the Women's Department. And the women were salaried by Mississippi unlike other states where women came and expected to be paid their expenses, but even that was hard to get. So the Mississippi Department was ready early because of the ingenious organization of women. I have to keep looking to see that I'm on the right track here. The ingenious organization, the Mississippi women set up 2 committees of 10 women each, and they had all of the items sent to one woman in one town, and all of the needlework and handwork was sent to another woman, then it was all gathered, and Jonas sent it to New Orleans. All the art went to Mrs. Money in Winona, all the needlework went to Mrs. Muldrow in Starkville, and then it all came together in New Orleans. Mississippi work was mainly domestic, needlework, all manner of quilts, crazy and otherwise, lace work, Afghans and window treatments, miles of crochet and embroidery, painted china, and miscellaneous items like pictures in moss, horn scrapings, I never saw that before, and fish scales, and including a hair wreath of the Fairchild family, including hairs from the heads of Jeff Davis and Stonewall Jackson. This is an example, it's not the exact Fairchild family, but I guess you know what a hair wreath is, you've seen them, flowers, and made out of hair. And if your grandmother told you that she showed an item at the fair, I have her name here, so see me later, because every item that was in the department is listed in the record. By name, by item, every tidy, every quilt. So see me later. Mississippi women also showed an overflow of as many items that were in the women's department, also with the state downstairs. They had so many items that came, they had to move some downstairs. And also downstairs was a large case of 100 stuffed birds in 60 varieties sent by an amateur taxidermist, Miss Carrie Poole of Natchez. There were many paintings from all states in the women's department, also separate sections for literature. Mississippi sent 6 books. Most of the books came from the North. Thank you. Oh. We're a team. Thank you. I tried on the top, but not the bottom. So, Mississippi sent 6 books. All the books from all the states were gathered into one literature department headed by Judy Warthouse' daughter. And it was also a gathering place because there were comfortable chairs and people were interested in what was there. And there was also a science department. And newspapers called it a revelation that women could actually do science. The department opened on March 3rd, 1885, was celebrated Judy Warthouse, as I mentioned, Battle Hymn of the Republic fame. She was not that popular in the South, and there was controversy about her being appointed from Boston to be the president of the women's department when there were certainly women, local women, who could have done just as good a job, but the promoters were looking for a celebrity figure, so she was the one who came. And fortunately, there was all this controversy because they're always writing about it, and that leaves documents for researchers to find much later. If it hadn't been that drama, I might not have found the whole thing. And near the center, the opening was near the center of the department at the pavilion of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, whose leader, Frances Willard, came to spur membership in WCTU, which was already 200,000 women strong. Her motto was "do everything." And women, they realized that they would need the vote to get to have alcohol prohibited. Southern women were more wary of the suffrage movement, having grown out of abolitionism, but they were very supportive of temperance, excuse me, because it was a family issue. Men would work, they'd get their money, they'd go drink it up, and the children and the wife would have to suffer, so temperance was a popular movement, and it was done through the churches pretty much. That's where Frances Willard found her leaders. And Willard held a giant WCTU meeting on March 13th in the music hall in the main building, and Mississippi women attended, and at least one, Mrs. M.M. Snell, S-N-E-L-L, was on the platform. So how were seeds of freedom planted at the Cotton Centennial? The people who came were even more than what was shown there. Advanced women were on the grounds and in the community. Frances Willard and Julia Ward Howe, for example, spoke to mixed groups, unusual for the time, mixed men and women. And as did Susan B. Anthony of the National Women's Suffrage Association and her vice president, May Wright Sewell. Intrepid Clara Barton represented her 4-year-old American Red Cross, begun in 1881. And Frank Leslie, who inherited her husband's publishing house, claimed to have hired a number of women journalists. Howe's daughter Maud, as I mentioned, headed the literature department, in which there were 1,400 books that had been written by women, and also newspapers and magazines that women published. And Maud, at the end, donated 800 books to a local circulating library, leaving radical ideas in books behind in New Orleans. Julia Ward Howe arranged noon talks, often with suffrage speakers, including the ex-governor of Wyoming, who told about women having the vote since 1869 in Wyoming, and yet the buttons got sewed on the garments and the children got fed, and every man had what he needed at home, that the women hadn't become unsexed or radical, they just simply had to vote. It was an inspiration to others. And he told how well the women handled the vote. And it was the first time that suffrage was getting a good hearing in the Gulf states. All through the event, women journalists reported every detail. Eliza Nicholson, the only woman who owned and published a major daily at the time, ran it with an iron fist in a velvet glove, even from a Bay St. Louis summers. She paid off a $70,000 debt that her first husband left her with when he died and left the paper in her hands. And she made it into a family paper by adding women's and children's pages and initiated a society column that, after the initial shock of women having their names in the newspaper, because they only were supposed to have their names in the paper when they were born and died, that became a very popular thing, and everybody wanted to be included with their events. They looked for their names there, all of which greatly increased the circulation of the Daily Picayune, and surely well into Mississippi. Catherine Cole, her star reporter, was a wage earner. She wrote articles all week for the Daily Picayune and 2 columns on Sunday, one an op-ed about a woman's issue and another one called Woman's World and Work, where she lifted articles from various newspapers around the country about what women were doing. Individuals who held unusual positions or groups of women who were working on an issue. So she was informing people wherever the newspaper reached. These 2 women would not have called themselves feminists, though, but they took women seriously. They reported the need for better training for jobs that were opening up at the time, and the need for access to higher education, and equal pay for equal work. That very phrase, 141 years ago. And even about progressive dress reform for active women who were beginning to skate. Skating was a craze at the time, and soon bicycling would come in. And also the women were complaining about the restrictive corsets that they were wearing. And those things were mentioned in the paper. The Daily Picayune estimated 100 ladies of the press came to New Orleans for the fair. And the Picayune, the Times-Democrat, and other papers had women reporters on site through the whole event. Because men of the press snubbed them, the women formed their own Women's National Press Association with Eliza Nicholson as its president. I didn't find the Mississippi name listed among those. Women needed work at the time, and these reporters told of displays where women could imagine new ways to use their skills and talents. For example, there were displays of taxidermy, dentistry, pharmacy, photography, and lithography, for example, proclaimed that women had entered unorthodox fields. Others demonstrated that women invented useful items, published newspapers, created literature, and mined for ore. And they worked in science and in design studios, factories, stores, and offices. Further confirmation of expanding women's work were examples of stenographic work and reports from women who administered prisons and charities, owned farms, and engaged in all manner of industry. Even humble needlework showed the common labor and leisure of ordinary women, who in many cases also earned money from home. Visitors to the adjacent color department found similar display and enthusiasm there as women of color presented themselves capable in general industry and especially in education. ultimately because female participants in both departments presented themselves as they saw fit. The strategy of separateness seems to have worked in this southern place in the 1880s. To show with everyone and be lost among the products and displays was one way that it could have been handled, but they preferred to be separate so they could call attention to the progress they had made. Those who sought independence and activism could find that one young woman, Belle Kearney, of Flora, Mississippi, heard Judy Ward Howe and later wrote in her memoir that she had had an earnest desire to behold a genuinely strong-minded woman, one of the truly advanced type, beautiful to realize she stood before me and in a position of the very acme of independence upon a platform, delivering a speech. Kearney then became a national lecturer, mainly for temperance, also suffrage. She said that the Civil War and temperance gave her a satisfying life, a way to earn money that brought her out of post-war impoverishment. For a time, she headed the Mississippi Women's Suffrage Association, MWSA. Unfortunately, Southern suffragists later took a darker marketing turn to, they were marketing their vote as a solution to offset black men's votes. The Kearney were mainly for prohibition, the 18th Amendment, which Mississippi was the first to ratify. Did you know that? 1919. And once women got the vote in 1920 with the 19th Amendment, Kearney ran for the U.S. Senate in 1922, but she lost. But the next year, in 1923, she won a seat in the Mississippi Senate at first. And the same year, Nellie Somerville won a House in the U.S. House, also a first. Kearney did not seek re-election, however. She went back to her flamboyant lecturing. She had said that Southern women are hospitable to new ideas as long as the speaker comes to them as a lady. And that declaration was confirmed at her funeral in 1939 when Reverend Ferguson of Flora said that she was indeed a gentlewoman for all her progressive ideas about the emancipation of women. Which takes us back to the Cotton Centennial and Susan B. Anthony. Her motherly appearance smoothed over her radical ways and actions. But during her weeks in New Orleans, she spoke to standing room only crowds on site and around town about her 35 years of suffrage. She spoke to men and women of the press and signed them up for suffrage right on the spot. She was very, very persuasive woman. She spoke to high school girls and told them to prepare themselves to support themselves and not to depend on some man. A shocking advice at the time, but also well received because the Civil War had disrupted marital expectations and women needed to work at the time. I could find no evidence that Pauline Orr of Columbus, Mississippi was at this Cotton Centennial, but she was making a similar case to demand more of women students she was battling for higher education as an avenue to opportunity and self-determination for women. In 1884, Mississippi legislators established the nation's first state-supported women's college, Industrial Institute and College for the Education of White Girls, IINC, in Columbus, which later became the University of Mississippi for Women and the W has an OR building on campus, and as Betty Jo mentioned, it awarded this book the Eudora Welty Prize. So to reiterate this event's legacy for women, especially in the South, more important than exhibits was the networking of ideas and dreams they shared and compared, how to redefine a woman's place. They sought a wider range of jobs and access to higher education. Newcomb in New Orleans was founded the next year in 1886. They wanted the legality of their signatures. Only men voters' signature at the time was legal. One woman in New Orleans became a suffragist because she was an officer in an asylum. One of the inmates wanted to leave $2,000 to the asylum in a will. The officers signed it, and after she died, it was declared their signatures weren't legal, so the money went to the state instead of to the asylum. So that converted Caroline Merritt to suffrage. They wanted control of their own money instead of having to hand it over to their husbands. They wanted to gain guardianship of their own children, which they didn't have at the time, equal pay for equal work, and many discovered it indeed they wanted the vote. And so women who hadn't yet voiced their desires and demands took their conversations home with them, where they gathered others and shared what they had seen and heard, and gradually some of the seeds of newfound freedoms grew. The women had taken strong memories home with them. And in years to come, more groups met in the Gulf states, seeking advancement, suffrage, and education, and having realized some of their own power in New Orleans in 1884-85. Thank you. I so apologize for my voice.
Dr. Miki Pfeffer, everyone. All right, what questions do we have?
Thank you so much for being here. This was so
Thank you.
fascinating. What inspired you to write about this topic and the subject? What was the inspiration, the genesis for this? And then also, what is your creative process in writing? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that question. I was taking a class in the history department called Gender and the City, in which we had to use only primary sources to write an end of semester paper. So I was searching for a gender issue at Tulane Archives, and I was looking in a man's papers, and the archivist came along and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I was looking for an issue," and he said, "Well, that man was Director General of the Cotton Centennial, and Julie Ward Howe was the president of the Women's Department, and we have her report and catalog in the back." So he brought it out, put it in my hand. I later told him he changed my life. He said, "I don't want to be responsible for your life." I read the introduction, and Julie Ward Howe was complaining about how the women of the press had treated her badly. Animadversion, they had used animadversion, she said. Wonderful word. So I thought, well, there must be drama here. She's complaining about how she was treated. So that started the whole thing. And then I started with reading every page of the Daily Picayune and the Times Democrat at the time, where every day had Cotton Centennial information. And I read for both those departments, the colored department and the women's department. And you learn a lot that way. Then I had stacks of papers and, you know, weeding out and putting in and pulling out. That's kind of the process once you get all that research done, I think. It's a pretty common way to do it. Thank you for asking. And then I found Grace King by doing that, because I was looking for first-person testimony that from women who might have been to the Cotton Centennial in either of those departments. And I found Grace King, a New Orleans writer. Her letters are at LSU, and I started reading, and they were so snarky and gossipy that I thought, I'm coming back to this woman. So then, after this book got going, I went back to Grace King, and my mission is to transcribe all of her correspondence that's at LSU. There are about 26 reels of microfilm. So that's my mission. It's a rush. Shall I die before I get there, or shall I?
No, you're pretty spry.
Spry.
All right, anyone else?
That was a long answer, but thank you for the question.
This is a silly question, but how did they get all this stuff back to everybody, or what did they do with everything that was sent in afterwards?
There were no silly questions. And the women who came with the merchandise, the items, especially Miss Maggie Kidd, for example, from Mississippi, they had to get them back to all the women who had sent them. You know, all those items. I don't know how long it must have taken them, but they didn't much sell the items at the fair. There was a Christian women's exchange that did sell some items, but mostly they were for display.
Fun story, we had a quilt from the Cotton Centennial here in Natchez, and I tried desperately to get a hold of it for this lecture, but apparently it's too fragile to come out in public. So which home had that many, Joe, do you know? Okay, if Kathleen was here, she told me which home it was hanging in for a long time, but it's been now archived, but still, cool. We had one of those quilts on display here in Natchez in one of the homes, so
That's wonderful.
cool stuff.
Anyone else? Yes.
Now, I apologize if I came in slightly late. The building, excuse me, I apologize for all because I was a little late. The building, is that part of that still there in Arden Park?
No, none of the buildings are left. They were, World's Fairs really, they built all these buildings, and they were really only supposed to last for like 6 months. If you see, what is that movie with Judy Garland? Meet Me in St. Louis. All those lighted buildings. They sold off the lumber after 6 months. Only one building was supposed to be permanent. It was the Horticultural Hall, and the city had paid for that, the city of New Orleans. And it was a glass enclosed building, kind of botanical building. But the hurricane of 1915 took it out. So,
Out of curiosity, so when was Tulane in Loyola started? You said they were not
Tulane
there?
existed at the time, but it was not in the location where it is now. It was downtown. Smaller buildings,
Yeah.
And it was later, maybe in the early 20th century when they were built, Loyola and Tulane.
Oh, and I just want to throw this out. I did have a grandmother living during that time in New Orleans. I have no idea what she was really like. And she did die shortly around that time of yellow fever. But it would be, her daughter had a scrapbook which I have, or I used to have. And sadly, the woman who put the scrapbook together was hospitalized as being mentally insane. But she had the scrapbook of women going on safaris in Africa and driving tractors like substance, I mean, just wearing pants. And I got worried that she was not really insane. Talking about family history.
Convenience, sending that.
Yeah, like she was just
Jane off.
different. And because I had asked them, I said, well, what did she do weird? Well, she wore pants and sat out on the front steps. And then she would come into our mother's, actually she was not, she would be the next generation. So it would not be the daughter, it would be the granddaughter.
Yeah.
She obviously was extremely progressive and out there, and I got worried that she was not mentally ill, and my father couldn't talk about it, so finally I found out who helped committed to the mental hospital, and I called, and they did verify that she was verifiably schizophrenic and did have a break, so I was glad my family didn't hospitalize somebody who wasn't mentally ill.
All right. We probably got to move on to another question now. Thank you so much, Mary Jane. We got another question?
Yes.
Here?
So during this World's Fair Expo, all these women, did you read in any of your research where their children were? What their children were doing when they were at these events?
Yeah, what they doing?
Interesting question.
They didn't have a children's department? They didn't have a children's department?
No, there were children, especially in the colored department, as they were doing demonstrations of kindergartens. I think most of the women who came to be like the head of their state's department were actually unencumbered by children. I don't think that they were encumbered that way. I hate to use the word encumbered, but they were older women. Julia Ward Howe was like 65. Some of the other women were 65. Pardon me if you're 65 and you don't think that's older women. It was at the time, and or unmarried women. Teachers were usually unmarried. But that's a good question now. Take that on as a research project. I'm busy doing Race Kings.
We probably have time for one more.
So, what was the opinion of like the husbands and whatnot of the women that were working in the World Fair and having these progressive thoughts, and the husbands of the women that they were spreading the thought to?
I'm not sure I understood your questions.
What their husbands think
What did their husbands think?
of
Yeah.
all of us.
You know, when I was traveling for 25 years selling women's garments, people would say that to me. What does your husband think about you being on the road? And I'd say, well, what does your wife think?
Get it, girl.
Men seem to have been supportive. There were lots of men listening to, like, Susan B. Anthony, for example. And when ex-Governor Hoyt from Wyoming talked, he talked to men. It was promoted as a progressive event, so, you know, you can kind of expect that they were more supportive on face value, at least. I don't know what they said behind the scenes. Good point. You take that up as a researcher. What do men do when their wives go off to do what they think is important?
Fend for themselves and not well. Dr. Miki Pfeffer, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Pfeffer will be signing her book at noon out there at our author signing table. Be sure to pick it up at the Conundrum Bookstore. If you like this lecture and you want to hear more lectures just like this one, please sign up to be an NLCC sustainer today. You will be entered for a chance to win this quilt. We only have 2 entries so far, so I'm just saying there's a pretty high chance you might